G'day everyone, I'm the Thorough Tank, and this is a quick reference guide to the new dungeon in patch 7.3, Seat of the Triumvirate. As always, this guide is designed to help pug tanks overcome their lack of confidence in tanking for strangers. Strangers can be judgmental and difficult to tank for, and it's always good to be armed with the knowledge you need before you step into the dungeon. A couple of quick things before we start. Firstly, as with most new dungeons that Blizzard releases, this dungeon is a little bit overtuned. Currently, as of the time of recording this video, the world record for a timed run of this dungeon is a plus 17. Now, that's probably a little bit on the low side for what people are capable of, but considering that the top world record for other dungeons is around about the 20-21 mark, it's obviously a little bit tougher. So mentally add a couple of levels to the key level if you get a seed key. Secondly, this video is being made only a few weeks after the dungeon even released, and it takes more time than that to come to grips with all of the little tricks you can do in a dungeon the way I have in some of my other videos. However, I did manage to find a few things, and I think you'll probably find it quite useful. On with the show. Straight off the bat, you're going to want to grab the pack directly in front of you, as well as the two slimes to the left. The most dangerous mobs in this pack are the famished broken mobs. They cast an ability on you called Dark Withering, which increases the damage you take from everything by 20% per stack. So if you're fighting more than one of them, this can add up really fast, and there's plenty of other damage coming at you, so you really need to limit how many of these you fight. Be really careful of these two patrols moving around the center of the area where the boss is positioned. One of them moves fast and one of them moves slowly. Make sure you pull these one at a time, or you'll end up with 6 stacks and be taking an enormous amount of damage. The other ability these famished broken have that you need to worry about is called Consume Essence. All it is a simple lifesteal. They channel on a target, do a bunch of damage, and restore some of their own life. It's pretty easily interrupted, so just make sure your group handles that correctly. The slimes around the area are also pretty dangerous. They put a stacking magical debuff on you, stacks up to 5 stacks and deals heavy magical damage to you. Just need to make sure your healer's on board with this and dispels it as often as possible. When they can't dispel, make sure you're using magical damage reduction cooldowns to survive it. You'll also want to be careful of the Shadow Guard Subjugator mobs. They cast a stacking debuff called Negating Brand, which reduces healing received by 10% per stack, similar to the Necrotic affix. They also cast an ability on your group members, which is called Void Suppression. That just makes them unable to move without dealing damage to people around them. It's not really something you have to worry too much about. The damage isn't very heavy on a tank, but make sure you keep an eye on those healing reduction stacks. They aren't actually that dangerous overall by themselves, so feel free to pull all of them at once. All the bosses in this dungeon are quite challenging, and the first one is no exception. Begin by pulling him back to the stairs where you enter his arena. I like to tank him on the right hand side. This is going to give you a little bit more space for one of his main abilities that you have to watch out for in the first phase. It's called Decimate, and he'll leap into the air, and right underneath you a large patch of shadow ground will be created. You'll need to use magical defensive cooldowns for this, as it does a big chunk of magic damage, and you'll want to move him off that as soon as possible. Each time it happens, just repeat the process, moving him around the outside of the room like you see here. He gets double damage while standing in the shadow ground, so make sure you're especially not in it when he's about to use Decimate again. It already hits hard enough, and if he's standing on shadow ground when he uses it, you'll probably get one shot. After 2 decimates, he'll transition into his Fixate Phase. You can be selected as a target. His melee attacks gain a knockback, so if you are the target, make sure you don't get knocked back into extra trash around the room, or get knocked in such a way that he ends up in the shadow stuff on the ground, because then he'll gain his damage buff. When this phase starts, one of your group members will be sent down into an alternate shadow realm where they'll need to clear out some little adds and fill up a void bar. Once they've done this, they'll be able to cast an ability called Void Tear, which will stun the boss for about 15 seconds and make him take extra damage. This is when you'll want to use Bloodlust and do as much damage as you can to him in this phase. After that ends, the phase starts again. Periodically during his first phase, in between Decimate casts, he'll cast an ability called Coalesced Void. What this does is spawns a series of shadow slimes that will slowly move towards the boss. If they reach him, they'll do a large explosion of AoE damage to everybody in the group. Even one of these casts going off can easily wipe you, so make sure you clean them out quickly, kite him away from them to give your DPS some more time, and make sure you instruct your DPS, if you can, to prioritize the adds near him. When he goes into his Fixate Phase, the adds can still reach him and cause their explosion, so it's really important that you still kill them. All in all, a challenging boss that can definitely get pretty chaotic if your group doesn't do things properly, but as long as you handle everything correctly, he shouldn't give you too much trouble. Before you leave this area, keep an eye out for a patrol that moves around the outside edge of this room. If it's not in your path, it moves pretty slowly, so you'll want to grab a couple of extra slimes like I'm doing here. You'll need these for percentage as you go through the dungeon. However, if the patrol is there, you can skip these and kill the patrol instead. Once the NPCs catch up to you, talk to Illyria to have her open the way for you to move into the next area. Once the way is open, head down and to the right and you'll see your first Void Rift directly in front of you. Grab the Rift Warden along with all of the slimes. This is always the same spawn every time. Make sure that you use heavy defensive cooldowns here because as you'll remember, the slimes put a heavy magic damage debuff on you and you don't want to be dying to this trash. Interrupt the Stygian Blast ability that the Rift Warden casts and move out of the Dark Remnant that he puts on the ground. It's just a purple swirl, does a little bit of shadow damage if you get caught in it. Once the Rift Warden dies, the Void Rift will close and a new one will spawn. You can see it by a giant purple beam of light. Head over there, make sure to avoid as much trash as possible. Most of the trash in this dungeon can be avoided, there is far more than necessary. Any trash that's moving or patrolling you'll generally want to clear out of the way, but anything that's standing still you can usually find a way to get around it. Pull this next Rift Warden, it doesn't do anything different to the first one, just interrupt its ability and move out of the stuff on the ground. You'll also notice that we've added a friend in this pool. This is a Shadow Guard Trickster. It patrols randomly around the instance, but they are stealthed, so you can't really do anything to avoid them. If they end up getting you in combat, just kill them as quickly as you can. The Tricksters don't have any substantial abilities, just a minor cleave bit of damage, and it's not really anything that you'll need to actually think about or worry about. On the way to the third rift, I'm faced with a difficult choice here. There's a patrol of some difficult mobs or a pack of 3 slimes off to the right. We can't fit between them, so I decide to clear out the slimes to give us some space. You're going to have to make some decisions like this on the fly when you're tanking as well, so try to use some of what I'm doing as an inspiration to make your own choices. As you're moving through this dungeon, whether you're in combat or not, you'll periodically see these large purple circles appear around each member of your group. They'll summon a fairly trivial ad, but it's really important that you stop and deal with them before moving on. If you just run around with them following you, they'll end up getting dragged through trash, and that's going to cause some real problems. So as soon as they spawn, make sure you pick them up and DPS them down. You need to kill 3 Rift Wardens in order to access the next boss. They can spawn in a few different locations, so make sure you're always looking around for the next one as quickly as possible. Keep on your toes as you're moving around this dungeon. Just because you think you can dodge a patrol doesn't mean that your group members are going to be on the ball. Self-awareness and situational awareness is something that your average pug group will really struggle with, and it's entirely possible you might need to be ready to pull some packs that you had no intention of pulling because one of them has managed to walk into it. So just be careful and keep an eye on your group. Up here we have a couple of new mobs, the Shadow Guard Champion and the Shadow Guard Rift Stalker. Neither of them is exceptionally dangerous, but you'll want to watch out for a couple of their abilities. The Champion has a frontal cleave, which you'll need to make sure you're pointing away from your group if possible. The Rift Stalker has 2 abilities. One is he'll drop an unstable trap, which is a purple circle on the ground that you'll need to step out of or be stunned. The second one is an ability called Wild Summon, which summons a Warp Stalker ad, has a decent amount of health and does a frontal dark breath. This isn't interruptible, but you can stun him to prevent it from happening. Once you clear out this final Rift Warden, head back towards the middle of the room where the boss stands, and you'll be able to get ready to engage him. Have a look around the room, make sure you're avoiding patrols or pulling them if they're going to be getting in the way. You don't want to be running into extra trash mobs while you're fighting the boss. This is one of the trickier bosses in the dungeon, so you're going to make sure you want to have plenty of room to play with. This boss has 2 ads that go along with him. They all share a health pool, so it doesn't matter which one you're attacking, but you do want to keep them together as much as reasonably possible in between their ability casts. The first and most dangerous mob to worry about is called Shadewing. Every 15 to 20 seconds throughout the fight, it will leap to a random party member and cast Dread Screech. If this ability successfully gets through, it'll disorient the entire party for a few seconds, so you must interrupt it. This is its only ability, but it is the most dangerous one in the fight. The other ad in the fight is called Dark Fang. As the tank, you don't really have to worry about him. All he does is leap to a random group member, turn in a certain direction, and cast a dark shadow breath in a fixed direction for a few seconds. Move out of it, but it doesn't do that much damage to you. Finally, the boss. He's only got 2 abilities, and only one of them is actually anything you need to do anything with. He'll periodically drop void traps on the ground. They're tiny little purple circles. After a few seconds, they'll explode and stun anyone caught within the radius. This can cause some real problems. If it happens to overlap with some of the other abilities, you can end up with a chain reaction of disorients and stuns, and that can really cause some issues. The last ability is called Umbral Flanking. It's not anything you need to do anything with. He'll mark a few members of the group and charge in between them, dealing a little bit of damage to each member. Like I said, it's not anything you need to do anything with. I'm telling you this only so that you don't panic when the boss starts charging around. Stick to the left up through here. There's a dangerous mob in the middle called the Umbral War Adept that you don't really want to have to fight. So stick around through to the left as you're crossing over the water and tell your group to do the same. Grab the pack that's directly in front of you. There's a new mob in here that you're going to want to worry about. The one to watch out for is the Shadow Guard Voidbender. They cast an ability called Corrupting Void, which puts a dot effect on one of your party members and causes them to create a vacuum effect, pulling your entire group towards them. This obviously can cause some issues as it removes the ability to control your own positioning. Particularly on volcanic weeks, this can cause an enormous problem. Next up, you want to grab these 3 slimes in the middle to clear a path to the boss. They're the same as the ones before. Remember, use your magic mitigation cooldowns when you're afflicted with the damage dot, and have your healer dispel it as often as possible. Now, after this group, it is possible to sneak through here to avoid the packs on the left and the right, but the gap is quite narrow, and in a pug, you're probably not going to manage it. You can get through just fine, but I would imagine that your group may not. Even in my organised run here, someone's pets did aggro some extra stuff, so just be ready to pick up the trash pack if it happens. It's not a big deal, you might still need the percentage anyway, and they're not too difficult. Either way, once you're done, jump down into the boss's arena and start clearing some of this trash. All of this trash is linked to the boss, so if you pull the boss without clearing it all, you'll end up with everything. While you're clearing this trash, keep an eye out for the large mob patrolling around the room, the Grand Shadow Weaver. You don't want to be surprised by it, you want to fight it by itself as it's pretty dangerous and can easily cause a wipe if you're unprepared. The other mobs in the arena aren't anything new, just these little tentacle ads which channel a little bit of damage on your group. You can interrupt them as much as you want, just to reduce a little bit of the damage you're dealing, but they're not particularly dangerous, they're certainly not going to wipe you. The Grand Shadow Weaver has 2 abilities to worry about. Dark Splice, which is just a channeled shadow damage ability, and the second one is Dark Matter, which summons an ad to the side of him which will channel an ability called Collapse, dealing heavy AoE damage. You need to kill this as quickly as possible. It doesn't have very much health, maybe a little bit more than an explosive orb, but if it goes off, you'll see what just happened to my group. They're pretty much stuffed. Make sure you and your group switch to that guy as quickly as possible so that you don't have too many unnecessary deaths. This is an interesting boss. It has what you might call a soft enrage, the shadow circle you can see that slowly starts to contract around the outside of the room. However, it stops at a certain point and doesn't contract any further, and where it leaves you with is enough room to actually complete the fight really without too much trouble. So although it might look like a DPS race, it's actually a control and endurance fight in disguise. The most important mechanic is Howling Dark. It's an AoE fear that will fear the entire group if it gets off. He only casts it once every 20 seconds or so, more than enough for you as the tank to get it yourself with every interrupt. You're the only one who's guaranteed to be in range of the boss every time, so make sure you get it every single time. After you interrupt the very first fear, drag him out of the middle of the room towards where the circle is slowly contracting. Not right to the very edge, you want to leave a little bit of space, but it's important that you place him to one side of the arena. Now the reason you do this is for his next ability, which is called Entropic Force. It's a bit similar to Dresseron in Dark Art Thicket. It'll just push everybody away from him, dealing damage. And because this arena slowly contracts, you want to have him to one side so that everyone can stack up in front, the way you see my group here, and be pushed away from him, and that way you've got the entire width of the circle to work with. If you leave him in the middle, everyone's got half the safe distance to work with, and not everybody will have movement abilities to be able to push back hard enough. His next ability is groups of tentacles that he spawns around the room, which channel minor shadow damage on the whole group. These will stress your healer quite a bit, and you need to clean them up every time they spawn, so all 3 of your DPS, even your melee, will need to move off the boss and get straight away onto them. If they're nearby the boss, you can help out a bit, but don't go too far away, as you'll need to be in range to keep interrupting the next fear. The last ability he has is called Eternal Twilight. 2 Shadow Guard adds will move from the sides of the room in and channel an Absorb Shield on him. You'll need to kill them quickly before he finishes his Eternal Twilight cast. It has to be interrupted before it goes off. If it goes off, it's just an instant wipe, the same as Maiden in Lower Karazhan. Heading through into the last boss area, you want to be somewhere around 94 to 95% trash completion, as there's 2 more large trash mobs in this last boss room before you fight the boss, which give 2.97% each, and so you'll get a little bit of extra percentage when you kill those. Once the door opens, run through and drag the little adds on top of the Rift Wardens. These are exactly the same as the one you fought earlier in the dungeon. Make sure you interrupt the Stygian Blast and move out of the darkened remnant circles on the ground. Once you've cleared out the adds and after a short bit of roleplay, the boss will become active and you'll be able to engage it. It's not attackable straight away, channels an immunity shield on it, and you'll need to fight the adds that come out of the portals. This one is called a Greater Rift Warden. It only has one ability called Fragment. It'll cast a shadow missile which will land somewhere in the room and need to be soaked. If it doesn't get soaked, it'll do a huge amount of damage to the entire group. We actually killed that one before it could cast it, so here's a shot of it from later in the fight. This is what it looks like. It's a little purple circle on the ground with a swirling purple flame over the top of it. Anyone can soak it, but it's always good for the tank to do it because you'll just take less damage than everybody else will. Keep your eyes peeled because it's purple on purple and it's not the easiest thing in the world to find. After you kill that first Rift Warden, Illyria will channel an ability on the boss which will send it into a phase called Backlash. During this phase it'll take double damage and you want to do as much damage as you can in this first phase. After it ends, it'll go back into the first phase again with 2 Rift Wardens this time. Kill them the same way you did before. It's much more likely you'll have to deal with the fragments in this one. You'll probably have to soak 2, so make sure your group is ready for this. If you get 1, that increases the odds that at least someone in the group will be able to get the other one. Make sure you stand in it, use a little bit of a cooldown to reduce the damage. Once you kill these 2 Rift Wardens as well, the boss will go into the Backlash phase again. This is the one you want to use Bloodlust for because after this phase, it will go into the last phase. One quick thing, these little adds that come from the portal don't do anything when they're alive, but when they die, they drop the shadow patches that you can see on the ground. It doesn't really hurt you, you can quite happily stand in it for a while, but make sure you try to avoid killing them directly on top of the boss, because you don't want to leave nowhere for your melee DPS to stand. It's inevitable that you'll get a few of them on there because you don't want to miss out on your own double damage on the boss. Tank damage can be pretty significant, but just make sure they die to one side. After the second Backlash, she'll head into the last phase. The only ability you need to worry about in this one is called Grand Shift. Each time it's cast, all of the shadow patches on the ground will move to the location of a player and deal some damage when they arrive. Easiest way to deal with this is just to pick a spot in the room and move back and forth. Each time it's cast, while the shadow patches are in the air, you can just walk to where they were before. You'll see me doing it here. As they move, I go back to where I was before and just pull the boss over. And you just go back and forth constantly until the fight is over. This phase is a DPS race. The boss does ticking AoE damage similar to the second boss in Court of Stars, which will just slowly tick higher and higher. It's not too difficult to heal through early on, but later in the fight it will get pretty bad, so use some personal cooldowns on yourself, and anything you can do to help the group is very, very helpful. And that's the end of my quick reference guide to the Seat of the Triumvirate. This video wasn't so quick. It's a new dungeon, it's quite complicated and there's a lot to think about. So I've gone over everything in quite a bit of detail. I wanted to make sure you guys are well prepared to tank this dungeon. Good luck out there. It's not going to be an easy one to tank for a good few weeks until the pug community starts to get the hang of things. But there are things you can do as the tank to make everyone's lives a little bit easier and increase the chances that your group gets through the dungeon safely. As always, be the best tank you can be, and I'll see you all next time.